Any questions? Anything you want me to discuss or tell you about? Or just completely embracing the moment as is.
Perhaps you could comment on the difference between the energy used in achieving selfish desires and the need to develop an effort towards selfless achievements.
Good question. In the Eightfold Path is the right samaṇa, which means the right amount of effort, which is something like that we need to know on this intuitive plane, because you can't say, how much effort you need for any particular thing. It's something that you're more aware of as a life process rather than as something that you can define. Whereas, say, from selfish attachments, then we tend to be caught up in kind of obsessive compulsive behavior, where we tend to do things always in extreme ways, working too hard or not working hard enough, or going from one extreme which conditions its opposite. So we get this kind of disruptedness and lack of a sense of continuity and ease with life, because one is either going at things working too hard, or giving too much energy, or wasting energy, or not putting enough energy into anything. And that is depending on, how we're feeling, whether we're motivated or we're not, or we're inspired or we're depressed by life, or we're ambitious or we're lazy or whatever. Then we tend to just have various habit patterns we fall into. But in reflecting on, as we develop the Eightfold Path, then more and more we learn our limits within the form we're in. Just what is possible to do within the type of human state we happen to be in. Like one of the monks has had this kind of, what they call this virus, ME, for the past few years. Where your energy is never certain. Sometimes you feel all right, and then then the next moment you just have no energy to do anything. And so it's as a monk, he had to live in a community that was quite active, actually, and yet through reflecting and contemplating his own state, he began to learn how to live and work within the energy limitations he had. And this was something he could only do himself, something I couldn't dictate to him. I couldn't tell him what he should be doing. If he has to know what he can do, and learn by trial and error, really, to adapt to the conditions he finds himself in, both as his own physical constitution and the environment around him. So that's coming from right understanding of things and willingness to to investigate and then to see, rather than to just take a position, I can't do anything ever, or I've got to not give in to this weakness and fight it again, and push past it. Those are the two extremes, where one, you just give up totally and don't try at all, or you just refuse to accept it and then drive yourself, and make everything worse till you totally collapse. Whereas you're more aware of how things are, then you find your ability to work and do things appropriate to the conditions of the here and now. And that's from the intuitive mind. I can't tell you how much energy to put into anything as a kind of statistic, but I can certainly encourage you to investigate and know how to how to develop, how to work with even the most unpleasant limitations. It's interesting sometimes you see people that have, really pretty horrendous physical limitations to work with, and yet sometimes they've gained a lot of wisdom out of it because they've had to, they have very bad health or paralysis or whatever, and they've had to learn how to live and operate within a restriction, physical restriction, that say someone like myself has been quite healthy most of my life, never had to live within such a restraint, physical restraint. Mentally, we're still, you can still, your mind is conditioned to think in a certain way. People who have, say, been paralyzed by a car accident or whatever, when they're young, they still have this mind that thinks in terms of being young and vigorous, and then this body that really is paralyzed. Takes a while to be able to coordinate the mind with the body again. Because if all your perceptions are being for good health and vigor as a young man, then when that's taken away from you, you can only feel angry or depressed or worthless or suicidal, just wanting to kill yourself because you can't operate to the same level and degree that you're conditioned to through the mind. But the reflective capacity of the mind and the wisdom then allows us to adapt. So we have amazing adaptability. It's to see just on the human population over a planet how adaptable humanity is, like from Eskimos in the North Pole to Amazonian Indians and people living in sweltering hot tropical countries, or the Aborigines in the Australian deserts, living on hardly, where we would, we think their ability to survive is so refined, really. What they need, they know, and where to find exactly what they need for survival. Or say, middle-class Europeans, we want this kind of storehouse, abundance waiting there, already there, guaranteed for a lifetime. Burgeoning stores, bank accounts to back us up. Where if you take, like they say, the old Australian Aboriginal people, they're fascinating. They're kind of hit bad times now because they've been intimidated by the white population, but they developed an almost refined and superb way of life that was based on just on the edge of survival, highly balanced, and yet they could have lived in more salubrious areas than they did, but they seem to be adjusted very well to these very kind of Spartan deserts. It's interesting to see how the mind and the ability to survive and how subtle it can become. And yet, we look, we tend to look down on them as kind of savages or inferior, and yet Yet our expectations of life are quite gross. We want this kind of material abundance and hoarding, really, of stuff to support us with. And the fact that we have, created a terrible mess of the planet in the process. So it's not always, it is a good example of how adaptable one can be, and when one has to, and survival, in the human form. And this applies to, say, just like our own physical constitution and the aging process. As we get older, then we lose that youthful vigor. We have to slow down, and we have to adapt to the aging, the body that's getting old. And yet the mind can still be youthful mind, still thinking in terms of when I was 25, and then the body not being able to be 25 anymore, not even an illusory 25. So then you can, vanity, a vain mind, then is stuck thinking, I hate it. It's not fair. That's vanity. But as a Dhamma, then it's Dhamma for us. It's part of my lesson in life to learn to slow down, to have to, say, move in a more careful way, not be so impulsive, having to train my mind to be and to accept the limitation of my physical condition is a very good practice as far as spiritual development goes. As far as vanity goes, it's torture, but as spiritual development, it's perfect for it. Because we're living, this is as a physicists are quantum physicists and modern scientists realize, it's energy. We're living this is an energy form. Everything is. There's nothing static. There's no static substance to anything. There's no hypostatic substance. So that one is, is that whole way of where we can create illusions of these assumptions that we believe in that seem to influence us, like kind of views and doctrinal positions of some kind of underlying eternal substance or essence. But that is something we create in our mind when actually looked at as a perception we create. But the flow of life is say the ego, the sense of being a person and an ego depends on the illusion of a continuous kind of quality or substance that goes on and on and on, that is particularly mine, my unique soul, or my personality that is kind of permanently there, influencing everything. That's the Atman theory that the Buddha was very much saying. This you can't, when you're really mindful, it's not the way it is. That might be a viewpoint you might hold, but it's not actually as a mindful realization of Dhamma, of the way things are. That's not the way it really is. So he wasn't trying to put it down and offer another doctrinal position, but presenting you with a way of realizing within the restriction that we have as human beings. I mean, we can realize, we can have ultimate realization, but within the restriction of our human experience. We're not going to have ultimate realization from the position of God, which is like knowing everything about everything from the top of the macrocosmic universe, Where conceit, human conceit, is what I can know just in a very subjective, microcosmic position I'm in is it's trivial and not worth anything. So what I want to become is God and know everything about everything. Is a kind of Luciferian conceit. You know, Lucifer was the angel that wanted to become, who thought he was God, wanted to be God. And this is a problem, this is a human problem, because there's a lot of that in us, wanting, you know, despising our own ability to know from a very humble kind of knowing. Because what we can know directly is humbling to us. It's not aggrandizing at all. You don't swell up with pride by knowing the Dhamma. But you do, you know, but when you want to know everything about everything, then you can. I mean, you can, if you're very clever and have a lot of kind of intelligence to remember and to manipulate symbols and that, then you can think you know a lot, which can be just a big ego rather than a profound understanding. So that the spiritual realization is based on humility and patience, not on accumulation of facts, figures, and knowledge about everything. That's why, you know, sometimes you hear stories like in the Christian tradition of like some kind of Franciscan monk that everybody thought was an idiot was really enlightened, or you know, playing the fool, or the one that seems to be the most despised member of the community and cannot even read or write, is the one that actually understands the teaching. It's not that saying that reading and writing is any obstacle, but oftentimes the fact that we do read and write, we tend to think, we create a pride and conceit out of it that blinds us from the actual realization. Because the realization of Dhamma is very humbling. It's something where we're not feeling that the illusion of self and one as being better or worse or same as or anything. All that falls away, and it is ineffable realization. So therefore, it has to be a realization rather than some kind of knowledge that's transmitted to you from somebody else. I think in religion, they all suffer, all religions suffer from the holier than thou, the spiritual pride. And I think, why? Because they all, in their own way, encourage humility. And yet, you know, the human mind can be so deluded that you can be proud that you're humble. But,
I've done from observations, I think Sri Lankans and the Sri Lankan monks in particular attach a lot of importance to learning the scriptures. Did you say that knowing the scriptures supports the practice?
Yes, the scriptures are. What I've never been able to understand is how you can read those scriptures and not want to do it. Because when I read the scriptures, I just want to do it. You know, this is what I want to do. This kind of inspired me to practice it. And yet I've seen so many Buddhist monks read the scriptures and never practice it, you see. So it rather bewilders me in some ways. But one thing is that because the scriptures really, most of them are very, encouraging towards practice, and they're like, as you practice, then the scriptures become, and then you read the scriptures and practice at the same time. It's like perfect combination. But the wonderful thing about Buddha Dhamma is that you don't need a lot of scriptures, like just the Dhammacakka Sutta, the Four Noble Truths, is really enough. That in itself is a perfect teaching, and therefore it is. You don't really need more than that, even though the rest are certainly supportive and helpful. But that's the first sermon the Buddha gave after his enlightenment, the Four Noble Truths, is actually. If you really penetrate that, then you've got it. That's all you need. But then there are all these other scriptures too, which are like the Anatta Lakkhana and the Adita Pariyaya, and then the whole, like the Digha Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Majjhima. All these are very, helpful in their own way. But they're not absolutely necessary, because actually the Buddha proclaimed his teaching in a very succinct manner. And then the Vinaya is also, like in our tradition in Thailand, the Vinaya was very important to understand and practice. So this whole way of restraint is most helpful to us, because actually the Vinaya, I think, is the least understood by the Western world, because it's boring. It's the least interesting side of the Buddha's teaching, and so nothing more boring than read the Patimokkha, is there? I'd rather read the Sony television repair manual. but then as a
more boring than reading Patimokkha is practising.
But it is, like these, but the Vinaya being kind of made such an important thing with Ajahn Chah, then, because that's more influencing your daily life and your relationships with others, and that's where so much of the suffering comes from, is like with one's own, impulsive, outgoing tendencies or habits or fears or relating to other people, and you're living in a monastic community where you don't have much choice about who you're going to live with. You have to live with whoever there. Then you have to. You have a prescribed relationship, a way of politely respecting the rights of the people around you, but you're encouraged to really look at your own emotional reactions to them, and to not. And you have a very clear way of seeing what is just your own personal preferences and likes and prejudices towards somebody, and what actually is appropriate behavior according to the Vinaya. So sometimes you have, like sometimes some people, will have, like lay people will have an aversion to a particular monk or head monk of a monastery, and then they'll come to me and they'll say, that monk. So then you think, well, has he broken any of the major precepts? No. It's just, then you get it down to the fact that they personally don't like the monk, and you're trying to get them to see it's just based on personal liking and an opinion rather than on actual faults, because you're establishing the Sangha not on a charismatic quality or on personality, attractiveness, being able to attract and charm and entertain people, but on propriety and keeping within the restraint of the Vinaya discipline. So that way you have always a way of bringing attention to something that is proper and fair and good, rather than just being influenced by whether you like somebody or don't. Where so many of the I remember when I was a child in the Episcopal Church in America, how that we used to have such battles going on in the parish over personal liking or disliking of the priest, and nobody knew what was, nobody knew how to handle it, because you didn't have any guidelines. It was just merely opinions and factions forming, and who would influence who, and it was. I remember having terrible memories of life in an Anglican church when I was a child, just hearing these endless jealousies and factions forming, and thinking, I'm never going to become a priest, last thing on earth. When like any of those things you say, you end up being that way. But just where in Buddhist monasticism, you have much clearer references because of the Vinaya is still regarded highly. And this is I find helps, in my own, because one naturally feels maybe more affinities with certain monks than with others, or these are just natural feelings, but and that you don't want to have it influencing your mind and determining whether somebody's good or bad because you have an affinity or don't. But you learn how to accept behavior or character tendencies that you might not particularly understand or even like, but which are not wrong. They're just different. So you're open to kind of what your mind is more prepared to accept variety than to just kind of narrow it down to what you personally prefer and what you're used to. So we're actually encouraged towards a much more kind of malleable and flexible mind, and all-embracing mind, rather than a tunnel vision, saying what I like is right and what I don't like is wrong, which is the ultimate conceit. Yes?
Ajahn, you said you don't understand the scriptures. Do you mean the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments?
No.
Are they scriptures?
No, these are Buddhist scriptures.
Yes, but you said a little while ago that it found it very difficult to understand the scriptures. Are you excluding the Ten Commandments in the Old Testament?
Well,
it seems to me a very simplistic way.
Well, those are the Christian scriptures. We're talking about Buddhist scriptures.
Yes, I know you are now. I can't see very much difference in the application to everyday life. What was written down in the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments, and what you are talking about of the Buddhists.
Right. Well,
isn't there a semblance, a very close semblance?
Well, religion, basically, you're establishing a moral commitment, like Ten Commandments are a basic acceptance of restraint, moral commitment, and so you're establishing your belief. You're believing in an ultimate reality or in God, I think the first commandment is, I believe in God, isn't it? And so, this is, but the Christian and Jewish attitude is very much, they're a theistic approach. So they tend to use commandments from, like, God commanding is very much the attitude of God telling us. The Buddhist attitude is different than that. It's not because there's not a metaphysical doctrine about God. Then the moral precepts are more. They're not commandments, but they're standards to reflect from. So you have like the first moral precept, which is to refrain from intentionally killing other human beings. This is not a commandment in the same way it is in, say, Christian or Jewish religion, but it is a precept that we take for ourselves to live and try to live within that determination to refrain from intentionally taking the life of human beings. And then we can kind of move on as we have more respect. Say, most of us are not particularly inclined towards killing other human beings, but we can, say, kill other creatures. So like a Buddhist monk is refraining from intentionally taking the life of other creatures. So that we're just, say, taking on this precept as a way of committing ourselves to respect life. But it's not commanded. It's not like if you kill an ant that you've committed some kind of dreadful sin. That is, it's not judged from above from above as a sin. But what you're trying to do, say in Buddhism, is to create a sense of personal responsibility for your actions, taking on the responsibility for what you do and say. Then that becomes more subtle and refined. At first, you can start out on a very coarse level, like, say, with the 5. In some places in the world, you can't even teach the 5 moral precepts. You're just trying to encourage people to be generous or to be kind. You're not trying to get too refined, but just if you're with very kind of coarse and brutal people, if you present a moral standard that's too high, they just they can't relate to it at all. You can't help them. But if you present them with things that they can actually succeed in doing, such as refraining from killing other human beings, then they can actually take that on and determine to do that. So to refrain from doing that. So this is a way of kind of leading onward and encouraging people, where sometimes moralism tends to come from a very high ideal of morality, and then that ideal of morality is kind of imposed on people where they feel they can't live up to it. So they tend to either they feel oppressed by morality rather than encouraged or leading onward. So in the Western world, like Victorian morality, and in the West we feel a lot of mistrust and aversion to the idea of morality because we connect it with a kind of moral tyranny. Like you have to be moral or you're going to go to hell, or and this sense of a kind of hypocrisy where the society says you should be this way, but nobody really is. Nobody's willing to admit it, you see. So the modern, say, European, American societies have rebelled against that, a kind of moralism and a moral tyranny. And therefore, like when I came to England 13 years ago, talking about morality was a sure way to make everyone leave very quickly. I lived in London. I remember giving a talk one night in the Hampstead Vihara, and there were all these kind of hippies. In Hampstead in those days, they had these kind of, what do you call them, like squatters and communes, and people that were just, young people that were just squatting in empty houses and living in communes, and they were all into drugs and sex and all this, so that they were this kind of libertine attitude. They came to the Vihara one night, and I gave a talk on morality. I never saw any of them again. And so, because I was presenting, because I wasn't really being sensitive to where they are. I was more or less coming from maybe from a self-righteous place, or it's talking about something that they still saw as something they didn't want. Like I remember Luang Por Chah, our teacher, Ajahn Chah, when he came in '79, the second time he came to England, and some people came and were questioning him about why he taught people meditation when they didn't have proper morality yet. Because in Asia, you get this idea, first you practice this sila, this moral state, and then from there you do the meditation, you get the samadhi, and then from samadhi you get the wisdom, or the highest state. And you start from here, and then you go from here to this top place. And this is how, they generally would regard it. And where Luang Por Chah was teaching them about wisdom, the highest point first, and talking about wisdom a lot to people who obviously moral life was anything but impeccable. So then these people criticize him for it. And so he said, with Buddha Dhamma, you have to be sensitive to where people are, and if eventually it all come together. But if you're talking about morality to somebody who doesn't understand what you're talking about, or doesn't appreciate that, then they tend to just dismiss it. So you start with what they're really interested in, because you're trying to inspire the mind at first. You're trying to create an interest in it, rather than take a very fixed position and a kind of moralistic position and a righteous judgment on them. You're trying to present them with something that will awaken their mind to a certain degree, to where they, often in London in those days, morality was considered, something of a bygone age. It was liberty and freedom that was the rage. Being free and spontaneous and doing what you want was but also there'd been a level of intellectual development in which you could approach people on an intellectual plane. So you could discuss Buddhist philosophy or psychology with them first, and they could respond to that. They'd take an interest in that. And that would kindle maybe some level of faith or interest in pursuing it further. So this is just a skillful means of presenting something in which you're tuning in to people's needs, rather than judging them from a very fixed position about what you think they need from your own kind of place in your own life. Like if because of the kind of highly developed moral restraint and renunciation of a Buddhist monk, it would say if one was attached to that on a personal level, then you become holier than thou. You know, I'm so much better than everyone else because I'm celibate and I don't have money and I do this, I don't do that, and you know, one could become very conceited and the holier than thou would appear. But that is a really ugly mental state. You know, to feel, if you really look, when any time you feel that you're better than somebody else, if you really look at that feeling, it's a very ugly feeling. It's not nice. It's not beautiful or pleasant or happy to feel that you're somehow better than anyone else. So then if you really look at that, you see that purity isn't a matter of keeping rules, moral rules, but in freeing the mind from selfish delusions and conceit and that kind of mental state. So then the moral precepts are more like standards that one refers to and tries to follow and restrain one's action and speech within the standards provided as a way of training yourself, rather than a position you take, a moralistic position you take and judge everything by. One used to think, because you know, one was brought up as a more in this kind of level of say, I was brought up in a very kind of moral family where the expectations for moral behavior were very high. So one develop, you know, it's easy to develop a kind of self-righteousness with it, and then to really make judgments, moral judgments about others. So, but in meditation, you're aware of suffering so much that you see, you know, I've seen the suffering of being attached to kind of fixed views, moral opinions about things, and you realize what a miserable state it is to be to feel holier than someone else. Yes. I mean, that's real suffering, to want to kill Salman Rushdie. You know, that kind of indignation is a very it obviously is a very exciting state. You know, vengeance and that excites the mind. But if you really look at it, it's a very miserable state to be in, to want to destroy another creature out of being caught up into. I'm sure most of the people that want to kill him have never read the book. So it's just a reaction, a kind of flock reaction to something. This man you all should want to kill. Kill him.
There was a cartoon in the New Yorker years ago. A monk facing a beautiful Gothic cloister, and one of them's got a scowl on his face. He's saying, "But damn it, man, I am holier than
Ajahn, we were talking about adaptability, wisdom to accept the present moment. Isn't that help a great deal by understanding of karma?
Like with karma, you would I'm all for introducing the law of karma into the British school system. They would make dramatic changes in behavior, because it is interesting to see, it's like cause and effect. I mean, like with children, because children are willing to reflect on things and contemplate things and wonder about things. So, I mean, like if you point out that if you tell a lie, well, what is the karma what is resultant karma of lying? Well, if you really look at yourself, like then you begin to see that when I tell a lie or I misrepresent something, there lingers something in my mind, something lingers there, a sense of something not being right, or guilt, or fear of being found out. Or there's something, even though you're never found out and everybody believes it, there's still the knowledge, your own knowledge that you've misrepresented something. And so that is the resultant karma of lying is suffering. Let's say, if you do a good action, like you do something kind for your mother, help her do the dishes or whatever, and then you do that, you offer. She hasn't forced you to do it. You aren't doing it because she's standing over you making you do it. You volunteer to do it in order to show respect and help your mother. Then the result of that, what does it feel like? What does it feel like to do good things for people? And then you see there's a kind of joyous feeling in your heart. So you can figure it out. You can begin to see the law of cause and effect. Then if you do a good deed, then the result is a good result. You have a good feeling about it. You have a joyful experience. If you do something bad, then you have fear and anxiety, guilt to kind of haunt your mind as a result of that. So when you figure that out, then you want to be careful. You're not thinking, I'm being good because I'm afraid of being caught. You're thinking, I want to be good because that's what I love being. I love being good, and the result of being good is a good result, and it brings joy into my life, where doing bad things only brings fear and self-hatred and worry and paranoia. And it's like in the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And these kind of teachings are very good. Children are quite willing to ponder on those. What is it like if you like cruelty? Sometimes children can be quite cruel, like kicking or torturing animals or whatever. And then if you get them to contemplate, I mean, you can just scold them and punish them for doing that, or you can get them to reflect on what is it like to hurt something, and then what is it like when if I were to kick you, what would you feel like? And then you think, well, it would hurt, I would be upset. Then you think, well, the dog feels that way, feels upset, feels you've made him unhappy by disrespecting him, and so forth. And then children will, unless they're psychopathic or something, will tend to think about it anyway. Then you're developing in their minds a kind of an integrity. They're not just being good because they're afraid of being punished. They're being good because they actually see the value and the result of being good. It has its own reward. Or oftentimes one is good because you're too frightened to be bad. And you've been told that if you're bad you're going to go to hell, so you're good because you don't want to go to hell. But it's still a dodgy kind of goodness, because when the cat's away, you know what the mice do, and so so that you're not developing a sense of personal insight into karma. You're just more or less conditioning people to be good by rewarding them when they are and punishing them when they are. So you get a kind of intelligent rat or chicken. But the thing that the law of karma is actually for contemplation. And I find the more I contemplate karma, the more one really does any evil actions or bad actions or selfish actions and speech, just like sticking your finger into the fire. It's just so painful that you don't do it. There's no reason to do it. There's no reason to cause pain to yourself. This is where you build this kind of integrity, personal integrity, which then has a strength, of trust. There's a trust. You can trust that. You're not just, making everybody smile because you're present, but when you're gone, they have self-respect to carry them on. They aren't just dependent on someone controlling them. Like one can see in a despotic system or a tyranny, where you're rewarded and punished by the people above you, that you don't develop personal integrity in those systems. You can't, personal integrity doesn't develop. I mean, it might be the exception to the rule, but it's not the result of the system itself. That when you are encouraging this in this human state, this ability to contemplate things, and karma, law of karma is a really good contemplation. Especially, for all of us, but especially a very, very skillful thing to teach children, because then you're developing their reflective mind, and they can experiment and find out, and you can bring things into their consciousness, like what does it feel? Just like I was saying, if I should kick you, what would you feel like? You bring things like that into their mind, then they start thinking of what it's like to be abused. Where if you don't do that, then they tend to think maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, the dog is just another thing that you use, rather than a sensitive creature like yourself. I like to contemplate, like because human beings were so conceited and think we're so much better than every other creature. But then, when you contemplate just the feeling of, say, the sensitivity of the animal kingdom, you begin to realize that their anguish and suffering is the same thing. It's painful, and it's the same. It's the same anguish we have. The problem is that we have retentive memories, so we can carry it along. We can remember it for a long time, where they can't remember it. But the actual moment of abuse is as painful for them as it is for us, I'm sure. At least I find thinking like that more beneficial to me than to think that somehow my pain is somehow much more real and important than the dog or the cat's pain.
Very great.
In connection with that, Bradley, someone said to me once, the most selfish thing you can do is to forgive someone. And I didn't understand that until something arose when you know, I was thinking, and she did that, and she did that, and look at that, how rotten. And then it's occurred that if you don't think that, it's only you that's suffered. You've gone through all that. You know, if you wanted to make her suffer, she didn't know what you were going through. So it is really, you know, a way of looking at it.
Well, like that whole view of I've been abused or I've been mistreated is like in meditation. You're just letting go of that whole attitude that I'm someone who can be abused. So there's nobody to forgive because there's nobody that was abused. There might be abuse in that, but I mean but also one can just contemplate forgiveness in different ways. Like it can be just a very kind of, well, I forgive you, and kind of a conceited, patronizing experience, or it can mean really, you know, I'm going to let go of this. I'm not going to carry this around, which might mean to you you're forgiving, but you know, forgiveness in a pure form is merely just letting go of it. But it also can be this very patronizing form of, well, I forgive you for your horrible behavior to me. But that's where, like with physical pain, is it like when I think of like kicking the dog and the pain, the actual physical pain, and the feeling of being abused, you know, of contempt, and from say if I kick the dog in anger, then there's this ugly state in my mind in the physical action. And it actually, the object is the dog's body, you see. So then the pain that the dog is feeling from that, plus the picking up just the ugly mood and the aversion and all that, because they're sensitive enough to be aware of that, to be affected by that. Then one is say, when say if somebody did that to me, I'd like to think of it as being the same feeling, because the sensitivity's there, except the actual sensation and the same miserable experiences I would consider the same. But then the difference that lies in that I could carry it in my mind for a long time and hate somebody the rest of my life for having done it, where the dog wouldn't. You know, the dog doesn't remember, wouldn't hold it in thought, and say, I'll never forgive Ajahn Sumedho for kicking me. And then the dog goes off to another place and somebody mentions Ajahn Sumedho and he gets angry. And we wouldn't have that kind of suffering, but we would. You know. If I kicked you, and then you'd go back to Lee's and somebody would say, Ajahn Sumedho's a very kind, benevolent teacher, and you say, oh, he's a brute. What he did to me. And that is because you have memory, and so you couldn't, you could carry that around the rest of your life. Just keep regurgitating, bringing up this one unpleasant experience, and that's the suffering, the real suffering of our human state. Because we can do that, but it's also through that intelligent and reflective mind and thinking in the right way that we can actually be enlightened beings rather than merely conditioned ones. So our sensitivity, our intelligence, and all is in one way, it makes life very more difficult for us. And we suffer a lot from it. We worry and anxiety and anguish and regret and all this haunt our lives because of this. But then in meditation and practice of Dhamma, you're transmuting this from a painful kind of obsessiveness to wisdom and enlightenment. It's changing just the attitude through right understanding. Then your intelligence, your sensitivity, you regard as a great gift, as a thing to respect and appreciate in yourself, rather than a kind of burden to carry about that just makes your life increasingly complicated and difficult.
Well, anyway, it seems to be a million years away from that utopian ideal, isn't it? I was thinking of the millions of people, if they have that sort of ideal in their life, it would be taken as appeasement by others.
I don't quite understand.
As appeasement, oh well. I think it's a wonderful ideal, utopian, for the individual, or for small groups, or for, say, Western societies. But I was thinking of it in a worldwide context, that, you know, this beautiful ideal could be taken as appeasement by others, willing and ready to strangle them and exterminate them. Peoples, I mean. You know, is it...
Well, like utopian ideals are, like idealism itself is a our society is a very idealistic one. It gives us high standards and ideas to work with, but because of that, we tend to become very critical of life, because we're attaching to how things should be as an ideal, and then life is not like that as an experience. It's not ideal in its actual quality, in its changing nature. So in contemplation and reflection on life, then we take our idealism not as a thing we grasp, but more as a guiding star to keep a direction clear, but not something we measure everything from. Like if you're grasping a high ideal, then you measure yourself and everyone else by it, and you're always going to come off as inferior. If you take the highest ideal and then measure your own self or someone else with it, you're always going to feel like a failure or inferior to it. But if you see that an ideal is a direction, to keep your direction clear, you need a guiding star, something to focus on. But you also need to be aware of where you are, what's in front of you. Otherwise, if you're looking at the guiding star, you'll fall off the cliff and trip over the log or whatever. And so, but if you don't have a guiding star, then you just get lost in the morass of life. You're not going in any direction. You're just more or less stumbling about, or going through the motions of moving from one place to another without any aim or direction to it, just wandering. So in Buddha Dhamma, you're aiming at the highest realization at Nibbana, is the guide, the guiding point, and then the way is always very practical, bringing attention to where you are, and to be mindful of the conditions that are affecting this moment, and in which you can keep your direction clear and get through the kind of difficult patches and obstacles and hindrances that inevitably are part of our physical and emotional experience. than in so much of the materialism, modern materialism, and it's like empirical science and modern materialism. They don't have any transcendent direction. They're merely kind of trying to think that all there is just the road in front of you, and that's reality, or that the material world, or the society, or that is what's reality. And so you're very earthbound, and you can just see it's like the modern architecture of materialism is all square, earthbound buildings. You get even high rises are rectangles stuck onto the planet. There's no aspiration. Where if you see like religious architecture, it always has a spire, has a steeple, has a something that points upward, something that directs your attention to the heavens, or to the stars, or to some which is symbolic of transcendence. You see, so modern materialism is ugly and coarse and vulgar. You get stuck into the mud and muck of planetary life, and no matter how you refine it and kind of manipulate the material world around us, it gets even more disgusting after a while. You can see just how pollution and through trying to manipulate the material planet that we live on and make it and transform it into plastic and all kinds of things that to suit our wishes and desires, how we've created quite difficult problems of just survival out of our lack of keeping our direction clear, because we've just been enamored with material world to where we've lost any transcendent our direction, or we're just wandering around on this planet for no purpose or no good reason. It's just meaningless and empty. Where I lived in like 26 years ago. I lived in. I was sent off to North Borneo in Sabah State to live as a teacher, Peace Corps teacher. And that was in 1964. And I remember then it was a relatively, unspoiled place. And I lived on the East Coast in a very small little seaport town. And there were no roads. You had to get to this town, you had to go by the straight ship, or they had a little airfield with little like Piper Cubs and little airplanes flying in. So then I met somebody the other day who had just come from Sabah or from Borneo, and said that now the jungles of Sabah are almost non-existent, and that they built the roads, and it said if you drive from the capital city of Kota Kinabalu to Sandakan, which there was no road there when I lived there was no road yet built. They say it's completely raised. No, there's not a big tree in sight. It's all just flattened. And then you think, Borneo was one of those treasures on the planet. It was an island that was never affected by the Ice Age. It had all kinds of life forms on it that don't exist anywhere else, and all kinds of delicate insect life and reptilian life and forms that were pre-Ice Age forms. And all this has just been kind of, demolished, because you can make lots of money by selling hardwood trees from the tropics to the Japanese. So out of just human greed, you completely destroy a magical and wonderful environment just for a handful of people to become extraordinarily wealthy. And you think, what selfishness and meanness of heart go into that? And you feel very indignant at such a misuse. But that is the result of being earthbound and thinking only of yourself and your own security on this planet. And you've lost your direction. You have no guiding star. You have no direction from the heavens to guide you. You're just thinking, you just get obsessed. If I sell more trees, sell all this jungle, all these wonderful trees, and I'll make millions of pounds. I'll become really rich. I can buy everything I want. And from that, you're just a wanderer on this planet, and you're a polluter, and you're a destroyer. Where the human being, if it's related to its transcendent goal, then we are like great blessings. We can be that which blesses the planet. We can be the caretakers. We can respect the animal life, the plant life of the planet, the waters and the mountains, the skies, all this, then are like we respect it, we protect it, we bless it through our understanding of Dhamma or of truth. But when we don't have that, then we end up as the worst pests on the planet. Because we are, so far. We haven't blessed it very much. Yeah?
What I find difficult is how I cope personally when I get those feelings of anger, because standing outside McDonald's with a placard doesn't seem to do anything. It's unfashionable, caring and to feel like that. The young people just laugh at you if you put forward your ideas on this, that you feel there's a lot of damage being done in the world in this way. Do you have any thoughts on that? How to cope personally?
Well, well, one thing you can always do is to develop within yourself the right attitude towards yourself and towards life in general. And because it doesn't. Sometimes it's easy to blame, the multinational, more industrial complex and all that, and to hate them for it. But that also is just creating the same conditions that stimulate the destructiveness. So it's not in pointing the finger and hating, but in keeping your own direction clear and relating your life to transcendent reality, and to let go of anger and hatred, and then to do what you can to try to encourage or right understanding and moral responsibility in the people around you, without becoming a kind of preacher or someone who's demanding anything from them, but just through our own example, as we develop, then that has a tremendous effect on the people around us. But what we most dread and mistrust in religion is hypocrisy. Me telling you what you should do without me bothering to do it. That is what we despise and we fear, because we've seen a lot of that, how easy it is to say the words, but how difficult it is to do it, or to be that way. So, as we develop a more patient and wise understanding of ourselves, then that has its effect on the environment. And then we can even guide or be involved in protests, but it's not coming from blame and hatred, but it's more trying to bring attention to things than just blaming and pointing the finger and saying, hate the McDonald's hamburger company. They're despoilers of the planet, and because that's the very same kind of energy that corrupts. Whether you're hating McDonald's, it's still hatred, or you're hating, or McDonald's are hating you. It's still the involvement with hatred that comes out of ignorance, and that's why when it's not a matter of blame anymore, but of letting go of that tendency to blame somebody. Life is like this. We have in Buddhist reflectiveness, we say life is like this. It feels this way, and so we're aware of these kind of feelings inside us that feel indignant or blame or that, and we're accepting those feelings, but we're not following them anymore. We're not going to think that once we get rid of McDonald's hamburgers that things are going to be all right, or that it's the timber companies in Borneo that are at fault. But it's really just the ignorant human mind that's doing this. The result is from ignorance, from not understanding things properly, that we create these kind of conditions. And so the important guide is towards enlightenment, towards seeing properly. Then there's hope and possibility for a society and a way of life that it would be a fulfillment or a perfection of our human and planetary state. That possibility where we've learned the lessons we need to learn in this form we are in. And one thing, like on planetary life, we have, obviously a beautiful planet. Planet Earth is a very beautiful place. But we're only beginning to realize that as we're destroying it, isn't it? Before we didn't really think of it in that way. We just, because we live here, we just take it for granted. It's only when we begin to lose what we've been taken for granted that we begin to look at it again in a different way. Like we here as we here in Britain, we talk about the beautiful trees and the forests, and yet the British woodlands and forests have almost been totally destroyed. And they're regrowing them again and all that. But as far as primary forests, I don't think there's anything left at all. But in North Borneo, which was primeval forest jungle, and you talk to people, native people in North Borneo about how beautiful it is, they can't see it. If you tell them how much a big hardwood tree is worth, their eyes light up. And they would think you're being a bit silly if you're saying, but we can't cut down that tree. And like say the ecologists, we've got to protect the trees. And they say, what do we want to protect them? They're here, we can make lots of money out of selling these things. But this tree is 1,000 years old. It doesn't mean anything. You start beginning to appreciate those once you start losing it all.
Some cultures have appreciated it, but for some reason there was something changed and happened predominantly in the Western culture.
Well, like you have in tribal cultures, there's a real respect for nature, oftentimes, because they very much feel a part of it. Their whole identity is with it. And but then, as you develop an ego, like a tribe. Tribal people don't have separative egos yet. Like a tribal mentality, the self-view is very much a tribal view. You belong, you're part of a bigger group. Your identity is with a tribe rather than with your body. And therefore that tribal mind is more connected to the natural environment that it's in too. But say in the Western world especially, your identity is very much with very artificial perceptions of yourself. Me as a personality is more real than my body. Isn't that? What I think and feel as a person is more important to me than actually the body I have. It's taken me a long time and determination to accept my physical body and my mind, because I'm so conditioned on the perception level to believe in and to hang on to perceptions of myself and views and opinions about everything that are really just artifices. They're not. They have no reality in themselves. They're ephemeral shadows of the mind. And yet, that's what we could fight over communism as an ideal. But send people off to fight a horrible battle with millions dying over our views about equal distribution of wealth. And Marx and Lenin and all that. Where does that come from? And that's totally artificial, isn't it? Created out of nothing natural. It's not based on natural law or anything. It is merely an ideal that human beings have created in their brain. And yet we're willing to kind of sacrifice ourselves, going to a battlefield and fight. And you can see in the Muslim world how willing they're willing to say, if, like they say now, I think the Muslims have said that the Iraqis want to have this jihad and fight off the whole world, and that any Muslim who dies in this jihad is going to go straight to heaven. Well, that is a totally artificial. That's an artifice of the mind and you could get people to go off and go out into a battlefield and be killed for that reason. But because that's how divorced we can be from any real understanding of natural law.